2 million people, men, women, children, the elderly, all standing before a sea they had no way to cross. Behind them, 600 Egyptian war chariots advancing at full speed, the empire's best horses, the most lethal archers of the ancient world. In front, water. On the sides, mountains. It was a perfect trap, and it was exactly there, that dead end, that something happened which defies any natural explanation. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand how 2 million Hebrews ended up cornered between the most powerful army on earth and a sea impossible to cross. And more importantly, you need to understand what happened in the 400 years prior, because the Exodus didn't begin when Moses raised his staff over the waters. It began with a famine, a family of 70 people, and a decision that would change the history of humanity forever. The book of Exodus opens with a list of names. It seems like a bureaucratic detail, but it is a direct bridge to the end of Genesis. The sons of Jacob who went down to Egypt: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Joseph was already there. 70 people in total. 70. Keep that number in mind, because when the Exodus happens, 430 years later, the text of Exodus says that 600,000 men on foot left Egypt, only adult men, not counting women and children. The most conservative math puts the total number between 2 and 3 million people, from 70 to 2 million, in 400 years. And here is the first thing you need to understand about the book of Exodus. It is not just a story of liberation. It is the story of how a family became a nation, and of how that nation was born in the most unlikely place possible, within the womb of the most powerful empire of the ancient world. But something changed. Exodus 1:8 records the most dangerous sentence in the Bible. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He did not know Joseph. Think about what that means. Joseph had been the second most powerful man in Egypt. He saved the empire from famine. He reorganized the entire economy. The previous Pharaoh literally said to him, "Without your consent, no one shall lift hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And now, a few generations later, the new Pharaoh looks at Joseph's descendants and does not see allies. He sees a threat. The text is clear about his reasoning. Exodus 1:9-10. Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen, in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. The logic was cold and calculating. The Hebrews had become too numerous. If a war broke out, they could ally with the enemy. The solution? Break them before they realized their own power. The first step was slavery. The text says the Egyptians set taskmasters over Israel, brutal overseers, to afflict them with heavy burdens. The Hebrews built Pithom and Ramses, Pharaoh's supply cities. These were cities of mud bricks mixed with straw, built under the scorching sun of the Nile Delta. But here is the detail that shocks. The more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Hebrews multiplied. Exodus literally says, "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew." It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Pharaoh was terrified. The Hebrew word used in verse 12 is quats, a visceral horror, a fear that turns into nausea. The Egyptians came to dread the Israelites, and when fear dominates a tyrant, cruelty escalates. The second step was genocide. Pharaoh called 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and gave a direct order. When you help the Hebrew women give birth, if it is a son, kill him. If it is a daughter, let her live. Think of the coldness of this. The plan was to exterminate an entire generation of Hebrew men through the very hands of the midwives. A silent death, baby by baby, in the birthing houses. But Shiphrah and Puah did something extraordinary. They disobeyed. Exodus says they feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. When Pharaoh confronted them, they gave a brilliant excuse. Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Was it a lie, a half-truth, intelligent resistance? The text does not judge. What the text says is that God blessed the midwives for this. He gave them families. These two women, whose names the Bible makes a point to record while the Pharaoh's name is not even mentioned, are the first heroines of the Exodus. They chose to fear God more than they feared the most powerful king on earth. If you believe that silent courage can change history, comment, they dared. But the failure of the secret plan led to public horror. Pharaoh issued a national decree, Exodus 1:22. Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive, no longer through midwives. Now it was an order for all of Egypt. Any male Hebrew baby was to be thrown into the Nile. The Nile, the god of Egypt, the sacred river, the giver of life. Pharaoh turned the ultimate symbol of Egyptian life into a tomb for Hebrew babies. It is in this setting of absolute terror that a woman from the tribe of Levi becomes pregnant. She gives birth to a boy, and when she sees that he is beautiful, the Hebrew word suggests something special, almost luminous. She decides to hide him. For 3 months, she succeeds. But babies grow. Babies cry. It was only a matter of time before someone found out, so she does something desperate and ingenious at the same time. She takes a basket of bulrushes. She daubs it with asphalt and pitch, exactly the same materials Noah used for the ark. The parallel is no accident. The Hebrew text uses the same word for basket that it uses for ark in Genesis. This mother was building a mini ark of salvation for her son. She places the baby inside and sets the basket among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Now think about the logic of this. Technically, she was obeying the decree. The baby was in the river, but she chose the location with surgical precision, exactly where Pharaoh's daughter used to bathe, and she left the baby's older sister, Miriam, watching from a distance. There is no accident here. Here is the strategy of a desperate mother. Pharaoh's daughter went down to the river to bathe. She saw the basket. She sent her maid to fetch it. She opened it, and the baby cried. That cry changed everything. Exodus 2:6 says she had compassion on him. The daughter of the man who ordered the death of all Hebrew babies looked at that Hebrew baby and felt compassion. At that moment, Miriam appears with a proposal too convenient to be a coincidence. Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? The princess agrees. And who does Miriam go to get? The baby's own mother. The irony is almost comical. The mother who hid her son from the death decree will now be paid by the palace to raise her own son. The system that tried to destroy him will fund his survival. The princess gives the boy a name, Moses, in Hebrew, Moshe. She explains, because I drew him out of the water. But here is something few realize. The name also sounds Egyptian. Mose or Moses means son of in Egyptian, appearing in names like Thutmose, son of Thoth, or Rameses, son of Ra. The name works in both languages. Moses would carry this duality for the rest of his life, Hebrew by blood, Egyptian by upbringing. The text skips decades in a single verse. Exodus says simply, now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown. 40 years had passed. Moses grew up in the palace. Acts adds that he was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds, all the wisdom of the Egyptians. This means astronomy, mathematics, architecture, medicine, administration, military strategy. Moses received the best education in the ancient world. He was, for all intents and purposes, an Egyptian prince. But something happened when he was about 40 years old. He went out to see his brothers, the text uses this word, brothers, and observed their heavy burdens. He saw the oppression up close, and then he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. The text says he looked this way and that way, checking if anyone was watching, and killed the Egyptian. He buried the body in the sand. Was it an act of justice, of anger, of identification with his people? The text does not explain the motivation. It only records the action and the consequence. The next day, Moses saw two Hebrews fighting each other. He tried to intervene, and the response he received exposed everything. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Two revelations in one sentence. First, the secret had leaked. Second, his own brothers did not accept him as a leader. Moses was terrified. When Pharaoh heard of the murder, he sought to kill him, and Moses fled. He fled from all the power, all the education, all the position. He fled to the desert of Midian, from a prince of Egypt to a wanted fugitive in a matter of days. And here begins the quietest part of Moses' life. 40 years of silence. Midian was on the other side of the Red Sea, in the Sinai Peninsula and beyond, a land of shepherds, not palaces. Moses arrived there as a foreigner, with nothing. He sat down by a well. The 7 daughters of a Midianite priest came to draw water for their father's flocks. Other shepherds tried to drive them away. Moses stood up and defended them. It seems like a small detail, but it reveals something. Moses could not see injustice and stand still. In Egypt, he saw a Hebrew being beaten and acted. In Midian, he saw women being mistreated and acted. It was something in his blood. The priest Jethro, also called Roel, was impressed. He invited Moses to eat. He gave his daughter Zipporah in marriage. Moses became a shepherd of Jethro's sheep. From a prince of Egypt to a shepherd of sheep in the desert, he had a son and named him Gershom, which means a stranger there. The son's very name was a constant reminder, I do not belong here. 40 years passed. 40 years shepherding sheep in silence. 40 years away from Egypt, away from his people, away from any greatness. If the story ended here, Moses would be a footnote, a prince who threw everything away for a moment of anger and died in the anonymity of desert. But God had not forgotten. Exodus 2:23-25 records what was happening while Moses was shepherding sheep. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. 4 verbs in sequence: God heard, God remembered, God looked, God acknowledged. The silence of heaven was about to be broken. It was an ordinary day in the desert. Moses was leading Jethro's sheep beyond the desert to Horeb, the mountain of God. And then he saw something impossible, a bush on fire. It wasn't uncommon. The desert had dry vegetation that caught fire easily, but this bush was not consumed. The fire burned, but the plant did not turn to ash. Moses drew near to see, and a voice came from the middle of the fire. Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moses took off his sandals, and the voice continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. The text says Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And then came the mission. I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. God was not distant. He had seen, he had heard, he had come down. And now came the part Moses did not expect. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I will send you to Pharaoh. Moses was 80 years old. He had fled Egypt 40 years earlier as a wanted criminal. He had spent 4 decades tending sheep, far from any palace, far from any power. And now God was saying, go back. Face the most powerful man on earth. Take 2 million slaves from under his nose. Moses' reaction was honest. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? It was a legitimate question. 40 years earlier, when Moses had power, education, and connections, he tried to help a single Hebrew and ended up having to flee for his life. Now, as an elderly and forgotten shepherd, was he supposed to free an entire nation? God did not argue about Moses' inadequacy. He simply said, I will certainly be with you. But Moses was not convinced, and he began a series of objections that reveals everything about his humanity. First objection, who am I? God's answer, I will be with you. Second objection, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? This question was deeper than it seems. The Hebrews had lived 400 years in Egypt, surrounded by gods with names: Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus. Every god had a name, a function, a specific domain. What was the name of the God of the Hebrews? And here came the most important revelation of the book. I am who I am. In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. God gave Moses the most mysterious and deepest name in all of Scripture. Not I am the God of thunder, or I am the God of the Nile. Simply, I am. And then came the form of the name that would be used from then on. Q, Yahweh, the Lord. Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this moment. For the first time in history, God revealed his personal name, not a title, not a description, a name. And this name meant pure existence, absolute presence, the God who simply is. If this impressed you, leave a like now so this video can reach more people. But Moses was still not convinced. Third objection, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, the Lord has not appeared to you. God answered with signs. He told Moses to throw his staff on the ground. The staff turned into a serpent. He told him to pick up the serpent by the tail. It became a staff again. He told him to put his hand into his bosom. The hand came out leprous, white as snow. He told him to put it in again. The hand returned to normal. 3 supernatural signs to prove Moses' legitimacy. Fourth objection, and this one is revealing. O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Moses, the man whom Acts says was mighty in words, now claimed to have difficulty speaking. What happened? 40 years without using formal Egyptian, a speech problem that always existed, deep insecurity? The text does not explain. God answered, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. And then came the fifth objection, the most honest of all. O my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send. Translation, send anyone but me. The text says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, not because the objections were illegitimate, but because, after all the answers, Moses was still saying no. But even in irritation, God made a concession. Aaron, Moses' brother, would be the spokesman. Moses would speak to Aaron. Aaron would speak to the people and to Pharaoh. And then came the final order, go, return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. Moses had spent 40 years as a fugitive. Now it was safe to return. Those who wanted to kill him were dead. He took his wife, his sons, the staff in his hand, and set out back to Egypt. While Moses was traveling, God told Aaron to go into the desert to meet him. The 2 brothers met at the mountain of God. likely the same region as the burning bush. Moses told him everything, the signs, the mission, the name. Together they went to Egypt. They gathered the elders of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses. Moses performed the signs before the people, and the text records the reaction in Exodus 4:31. So the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel and that he had looked on their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. After 400 years of silence, God had visited his people. But the easy part was over. Convincing the Hebrews was simple compared to what was coming next. Now Moses and Aaron needed to enter the palace of the most powerful man in the world and tell him to release 2 million slaves who sustained the entire Egyptian economy. Exodus 5 opens with Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh. The message was direct. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh's response was equally direct. Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. I do not know the Lord. Pharaoh was not just refusing, he was challenging. Who is this God? I am Pharaoh. I am the incarnation of Horus. The gods I know are Ra, Osiris, Isis. This Lord of the Hebrews means nothing to me. And prove his point, Pharaoh increased the oppression. He ordered the taskmasters, do not give the Hebrews straw to make bricks anymore. Let them gather straw for themselves, but the quota of bricks remains the same. It was physically impossible. Gather straw and make the same amount of bricks in the same period of time? The Hebrews began to be beaten when they did not meet the quotas. The Hebrew foreman went to Pharaoh to complain. His response was cruel. You are idle, idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go now and work. And then these same foremen met Moses and Aaron as they were leaving the palace, and their words were devastating. Let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. The mission of liberation had made the people's lives worse, not better. Moses did the only thing he could do. He went back to the Lord and asked, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. It was a raw question, honest, the question of a man who obeyed and saw everything get worse, and God's answer set the tone for everything that would follow. Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. God was not surprised by Pharaoh's resistance. He had told Moses from the beginning that this would happen. Exodus 3:19. But I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go, no, not even by a mighty hand. Pharaoh's hardening was not an obstacle to the plan. It was part of the plan. Because God was not just liberating slaves, he was making a demonstration of power that would be remembered by all nations for all generations. The Egyptians worshipped dozens of gods. Each god controlled an aspect of nature, the sun, the Nile, crops, animals, life, death. What was about to happen would be a direct confrontation, the God of Israel against every god of Egypt. One by one, the plagues would attack the domains of the Egyptian gods and prove that they were nothing. And Pharaoh, who considered himself divine, would discover who really controlled the world. The first plague attacked the heart of Egypt, the Nile. Moses and Aaron met Pharaoh at the riverbank in the morning. Aaron raised the staff, struck the water, and all the water in the Nile turned to blood. Not just the main river. All the canals, all the ponds, all the reservoirs, even the water stored in vessels of wood and stone. Blood. The fish died. The smell was unbearable. The Egyptians could not drink. They had to dig wells along the banks to find water. The Nile was worshipped as the god Hapi, the source of all life in Egypt. Without the annual flooding of the Nile, there was no agriculture. Without agriculture, there was no Egypt. The Nile was literally sacred, and now the Nile was rotten. But Pharaoh's magicians managed to replicate the sign. They turned more water into blood. And Pharaoh hardened his heart. The plague lasted 7 days. And just when you think you've understood the pattern, get ready. Because each plague that follows will escalate the confrontation in a way you don't expect. 7 days later, Moses returned to Pharaoh. The message was the same. Let my people go. The answer was the same. No. And the second plague came. Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt and frogs came up. Not just a few frogs, an invasion. The text is specific about where they went. The river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, into your bedroom, on your bed, into the houses of your servants, on your people, into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. Imagine this. You are sleeping and you feel something cold and slimy on your leg. You open a cupboard and frogs jump in your face. You try to make bread and there are frogs in the dough. They were everywhere, in palaces, in the houses of the nobles, in the huts of the peasants. All of Egypt croaked. And here is the detail that many miss. Heket, the Egyptian goddess of fertility, was represented with the head of a frog. Frogs were considered sacred. Killing a frog was a crime. And now there were so many frogs that it was impossible to take a step without stepping on them. The sacred symbol of fertility had become a disgusting curse. Pharaoh's magicians, again, managed to replicate the sign. They also made frogs appear. But think about the futility of that. Egypt was already infested with frogs, and the best thing the magicians could do was create more frogs. They could imitate the problem, but they could not solve it. For the first time, Pharaoh yielded, at least partially. He called Moses and Aaron and said, "Entreat the Lord, that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go." Moses did something interesting. He gave Pharaoh the power to choose the moment. "When shall I entreat for you?" Pharaoh said, "Tomorrow, tomorrow." With the palace infested with frogs, with frog in the royal bed, with frogs on the royal plate, Pharaoh didn't say right now. He said tomorrow. It is almost inexplicable. Perhaps he wanted to test if Moses actually controlled the phenomenon. Perhaps it was pride, not wanting to seem desperate. The text does not explain. The next day, the frogs died, all of them, at the same time. The text says, "They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank, heaps of dead frogs all over Egypt. And when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not let the people go." The third plague came without warning. God told Aaron to stretch out his staff and strike the dust of the ground. And all the dust of Egypt turned into lice, or gnats, depending on the translation. The Hebrew word kinim is debated, but the effect is clear. Tiny insects that attacked people and animals. They covered the skin, got into eyes, ears, and noses, impossible to escape. And here, something significant happened. The magicians tried to replicate the plague and could not. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. They tried and failed, and then they said to Pharaoh the most revealing words so far, "This is the finger of God." The magicians of Egypt themselves admitted they were facing a power that exceeded any magic they knew. The finger of God. Not the whole hand, just the finger. And even so, it was more than they could face. But Pharaoh did not listen. The text repeats the formula. Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them. The fourth plague introduced a new element. God told Moses to meet Pharaoh in the morning when he went out to the river and warn him, "Swarms of flies will come." But this time, there was a distinction. "And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land." For the first time, the plagues would not affect the Hebrews. The first three hit all of Egypt equally. From the fourth on, God made a visible separation. The swarms covered Egypt, houses darkened by flies, food spoiled, animals driven mad. But in Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, not a single fly. Not one. The geographic separation was impossible to explain naturally. Flies do not respect borders, they go where they want. And yet, an invisible line divided Egypt into two realities, the Egyptians living a nightmare, the Hebrews at peace. Pharaoh began to negotiate. Go, sacrifice to your God in the land. Moses refused. Hebrew sacrifices would be an abomination to the Egyptians. They likely included animals that the Egyptians considered sacred. There would be conflict. Pharaoh tried another compromise. I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you shall not go very far away. Moses agreed to pray for the removal of the flies. The flies disappeared. Not one died, they simply went away. And Pharaoh again changed his mind. The fifth plague hit Egypt's wealth directly. A pestilence killed the livestock, horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep. But again, the text specifies, but of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. Pharaoh sent messengers to check. It was true. The Hebrew livestock was intact. The Egyptian livestock was dying in mass. And still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The sixth plague attacked bodies. God told Moses and Aaron to take ashes from a furnace and scatter them toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh. The ashes spread over all of Egypt and turned into boils, inflamed sores that broke out on the skin of people and animals, painful tumors, inflammations that would not heal. And here is a detail the text mentions almost casually. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. The magicians who had tried to compete with Moses now could not even stand in his presence. They were covered in sores, humiliated, defeated, unable even to appear. The seventh plague raised the scale to an unprecedented level. God told Moses to warn Pharaoh in advance. Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now, hail, but not ordinary hail. The text says it was the worst in all the history of Egypt, and God gave a specific warning. Therefore send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field and is not brought home, and they shall die. It was a test. Who would take the God of Israel seriously? The text records that some of Pharaoh's servants feared the word of the Lord and gathered their slaves and livestock. Others ignored the warning. The next day, Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven. Thunder, lightning, hail, fire mingled with hail, the text says, likely lightning striking along with the ice stones. The hail killed everything that was in the field, people, animals, crops. The grass of the field was destroyed, trees were broken. It was total devastation. But in Goshen, nothing. Not a single hailstone. Pharaoh called Moses and for the first time used language that sounded like genuine repentance. I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous and my people and I are wicked. Moses agreed to pray. He went out of the city, stretched out his hands to the Lord, and the thunder and hail ceased. And the text records with an almost tired irony, and when Pharaoh saw that the rain, the hail, and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet more, and he hardened his heart. The pattern was clear. Disaster, promise, relief, broken promise. Disaster, promise, relief, broken promise. Each cycle more devastating than the last. Each refusal more obstinate. But something was changing. Pharaoh's counselors began to speak. The eighth plague was coming, and this time Pharaoh's own inner circle would try to intervene. God told Moses to return to Pharaoh with a warning of locusts, clouds of locusts that would devour everything the hail had not destroyed. Before Moses could even finish speaking, Pharaoh's servants said something they had never said before. "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed?" Pharaoh's own advisors were saying, "Enough, Egypt can't take any more. Let these people go." Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron back and tried to negotiate who exactly would go. Moses was clear: everyone. Young, old, sons, daughters, flocks, herds, everyone. Pharaoh refused. He offered to let only the men go, and he drove them out of his presence. Moses stretched out his staff. God brought an east wind that blew all that day and all that night. When morning came, the locusts had arrived. The text says they covered the face of the whole earth so that the land was darkened. It's not a metaphor. Swarms of locusts can be so dense they block the sunlight. They ate all the vegetation. Everything the hail had left, the locusts devoured. Nothing green remained. Not a leaf, not a herb, not a fruit. Pharaoh called Moses in haste. "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore please forgive my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God, that he may take away from me this death only, this death." That was how Pharaoh described the locusts, the slow death of an entire nation. Moses prayed. God sent a very strong west wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not one locust remained in all the territory of Egypt, and Pharaoh hardened his heart. The 9th plague had no warning. There was no negotiation. There was no meeting with Pharaoh. God simply told Moses to stretch out his hand toward heaven, and darkness came, not the darkness of night. The text calls it thick darkness, darkness that could be felt. For 3 days, no Egyptian saw another. No one rose from his place for 3 days. Total darkness, absolute, paralyzing. Think about what this meant for Egypt. Ra, the sun god, was the supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon. Pharaoh himself was considered the son of Ra. The sun was the ultimate divinity, the source of all life, the supreme power. And now the sun had been switched off. For 3 days, Ra did not exist. The son of Ra sat in the dark, powerless, unable to see his own hand in front of his face. But the text adds an almost casual sentence. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. In Goshen, the sun was shining. The Hebrews lived in full light while Egypt was plunged into supernatural darkness. The separation had never been so visible, or rather, it had never been so invisible for Egypt and so luminous for Israel. Pharaoh called Moses. In the darkness somehow, he sent for the man who was destroying his kingdom, and he made his final offer. "Go, serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you." It was almost everything, almost. The people could go, but the animals would stay. Moses refused. "Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind." Not a hoof. It was all or nothing. Pharaoh exploded. "Get away from me! Take heed to yourself and see my face no more, for in the day you see my face you shall die." Moses replied with a calm that is almost disturbing, "You have spoken well. I will never see your face again." But before leaving, Moses delivered the final warning. The 10th plague, the plague that would change everything. "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals." It wouldn't be insects, it wouldn't be diseases, it wouldn't be weather, it would be death, direct, personal. In every Egyptian house, the firstborn, the heir, the most precious, the future of the family, die. Moses continued, "Then there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again." And then he made a final distinction. "But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue, against man or beast, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. Not a dog barking. Total silence in Goshen while Egypt screamed. Moses went out from Pharaoh in great anger, the text says. His patience was gone. 9 plagues, 9 chances, 9 refusals. Now the 10th would come, and nothing in Egypt, no god, no spell, no power could stop it. But before the 10th plague fell, God gave very specific instructions to the Hebrews. Instructions that would create the most important ritual in Israel's history. Instructions about a lamb, about blood, about a night that would be remembered forever. Exodus 12 opens with a redefinition of time. God told Moses and Aaron, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." The Hebrew calendar was being reset. What would happen that night would be so significant that it would mark a new beginning. Not just for that generation, but for all future generations. Israel would count time from that moment. The instructions were precise. On the 10th day of the month, each family was to set aside a lamb or a kid, 1 animal per house. If the family was too small to consume a whole animal, they were to join with neighbors. The lamb was to be without blemish, a male of the first year, and it was to be kept until the 14th day of the month. 4 days of observation. 4 days verifying that the animal was perfect. 4 days during which inevitably the children would grow attached to the lamb. And then, at the twilight of the 14th day, the whole congregation of Israel would kill their lambs. All at the same time, hundreds of thousands of lambs at sunset in the same moment. The blood was to be collected in a basin. And then came the strangest instruction. "And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Blood on the doors, on the sides, on the top. A visible mark on every Hebrew house. The meat was to be roasted over fire, not boiled in water, not raw. Roasted whole, with its head, its legs, and its entrails. It was to be eaten with unleavened bread, without yeast, and with bitter herbs. And the manner of eating was specific. And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Belted waist means clothes tucked in for travel, sandals on feet, ready to walk, staff in hand, ready to depart. They would eat standing up, dressed for the road, like travelers about to leave. It was not a relaxed meal. It was a meal of flight. And then God explained why the blood on the doors was necessary. "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Judgment against all the gods of Egypt." The 9 plagues had attacked specific gods, the Nile, Heket, Ra. But this plague was the final blow against the entire Egyptian religious system. No Egyptian god could protect the firstborn. No amulet, no spell, no ritual. And the blood, "Now blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. I will pass over." In Hebrew, Pasach. From this comes the name Pesach, Passover. The feast of the passing over. The night the destroyer saw the blood and moved on. The blood of the lamb was not decoration. It was the difference between life and death. Moses gathered the elders of Israel and passed on the instructions. Every family was to do exactly as God had commanded. And then he added something crucial. "And it shall be, when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' that you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households.'" It was an instruction for the future, not just for that night, but for all generations. When your children ask, because they will ask, you will tell the story of the blood, the story of liberation, the story of the night God distinguished between Egypt and Israel. The people bowed their heads and worshipped, and they went and did exactly as the Lord had commanded. Midnight arrived. Exodus records the moment with an economy of words that makes it all the more terrible. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock, from the throne to the dungeon, from the palace to prison. No social class escaped. No level of wealth or poverty made a difference. If they were Egyptian and firstborn, they died. The following verse describes the reaction. So Pharaoh rose in the night, he, all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. There was not a house where there was not one dead. Think about what that means. Every Egyptian house woke up to a corpse, the eldest son, the heir, the future of the family, dead. No medical explanation, no prior illness, no visible wound, simply dead. The scream that echoed through Egypt that night was a sound no survivor would ever forget. Millions of people screaming at the same time, mothers holding bodies still warm, fathers trying to wake sons who would not wake up, all of Egypt howling in pain under an indifferent sky, and in Goshen, silence, not a dog barking, Hebrew families finishing their hurried meal, blood drying on the doors, bags packed, sandals on feet, waiting. Pharaoh did not wait for dawn. That very night, he summoned Moses and Aaron. The man who days before had threatened to kill Moses if he saw him again now sent for him in haste, in the middle of the night, while the body of his own son grew cold somewhere in the palace. Pharaoh's words were short, defeated. Rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as you have said, as you have said. 3 times he repeated the phrase. He was no longer negotiating. He was no longer imposing conditions. He was capitulating completely. Everything Moses had asked for from the beginning, the whole people, the animals, everything was now granted. And then Pharaoh added something unexpected, and bless me also. The man who had challenged the God of Israel, who had asked, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" now asked for a blessing. Arrogance had turned to despair. Contempt had turned to fear. The God King of Egypt was begging the slaves who had served his kingdom for generations. The Egyptians also acted. The text says they urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." The terror was total. If they stayed one more night, what else would happen? Who else would die? The Egyptians wanted the Hebrews out, immediately, at any cost. And here something happened that the text records almost as a footnote, but which has enormous implications. The Israelites did what Moses had instructed days before. They asked the Egyptians for articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the text says that the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. The Egyptians handed over their riches voluntarily, family jewels passed down through generations, gold accumulated for decades, fine clothes. All of this went into the hands of the slaves who were departing. The text summarizes with a phrase loaded with meaning, and they plundered the Egyptians. Plundered, the same word used for the looting after a battle. But there was no battle. The Egyptians simply handed everything over. 430 years of unpaid labor, generations of slavery, sweat, blood, lives lost, building the cities and monuments of Egypt. And now, on the way out, a compensation. It wasn't theft, it was payment. The wages of centuries of forced service finally collected in a single night. The Israelites set out from Ramses to Succoth, and here the text gives us numbers. Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. 600,000 adult men. If you add women, children, and the elderly, estimates range from 2 to 3 million people. It was one of the largest migrations in ancient history. an entire nation on the move. Along with them went a mixed multitude. The Hebrew text uses Erev Rav, a mixed crowd. Likely Egyptians who had seen the power of the God of Israel and decided to follow. Perhaps slaves of other nationalities taking the opportunity. People who, for whatever reason, chose to leave Egypt with the Hebrews. Liberation was not exclusive. Anyone who wanted to could go. And they also took flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock, millions of animals. Imagine the sound. Imagine the organized chaos. Imagine the dust cloud raised by this human and animal mass moving through the desert. It was the Exodus, the exit, the moment that gives the entire book its name. The text pauses to mention a culinary detail that would become central to the Israeli identity. The people baked the dough they had brought from Egypt, unleavened cakes, because it had not leavened. They were driven out of Egypt and could not delay. They hadn't even prepared food for the journey. The haste was real. There was no time to wait for the dough to rise. There was no time to prepare proper provisions. They left with what they had, trusting that the God who had just devastated Egypt would also take care of them in the desert. And because of that, to this day, Jews eat unleavened bread during Passover, matzah, a physical, edible reminder that their ancestors left so quickly that the dough had no time to rise. The text then records the exact duration of the stay in Egypt, 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. On that very same day, precision mattered. It wasn't an approximate day, it was the exact day. God had promised Abraham, centuries earlier, that his descendants would be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years, but afterward they would come out with great possessions. The promise had been fulfilled on the appointed day with the promised riches. Nothing had been forgotten, nothing had been delayed. Exodus 13 opens with God instituting more laws related to the liberation. The firstborn, both of men and of animals, was to be consecrated to the Lord. Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast. It is mine. It was a permanent reminder. On the night of the 10th plague, the Egyptian firstborn died. The Israeli firstborn was spared. And because of that, from then on, every Hebrew firstborn would belong to God in a special way. Liberation had a cost, and the memory of that cost would be inscribed into the very families of Israel. Moses instructed the people on how to observe the festival of unleavened bread, 7 days eating bread without yeast, on the 7th day a feast to the Lord. And the reason was simple and direct. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt, a sign on the hand, a memorial between the eyes. Centuries later, Jews would literally tie small boxes containing scriptures to fill in on their hand and forehead. What began as a metaphor became a physical practice. The liberation from Egypt would not just be remembered, it would be worn, carried on the body, impossible to forget. The route of the Exodus is described with a fascinating strategic detail. God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. The shortest way from Egypt to Canaan was the coastal route, the Via Maris, as it would be called later. A well-established road, relatively easy to travel. But this route passed through Philistine territory, a militarized region full of Egyptian fortresses and potential conflicts. God knew his people. They had just come out of centuries of slavery. They had no military experience. They did not have the mindset of warriors. If they saw battle so soon, they might panic and want to return to Egypt. So God led them by the way of the wilderness, toward the Red Sea. A longer route, harder, but psychologically safer. They needed time. Time to transform from slaves into a nation. Time to learn to trust the God who had liberated them. Time to stop thinking like Egyptians and start thinking like Israelites. The route was not just geographic, it was formative. And the people went out armed. The text mentions almost casually that the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. They had weapons. From where? Possibly from the Egyptian spoils, possibly kept secretly during slavery. The text does not explain, but they were not a totally defenseless mass. They were an armed people, even if inexperienced. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Centuries earlier, when Joseph was dying in Egypt, he had made his brothers swear they would take his remains with them when God finally visited them and took them out of that land. God will surely visit you, Joseph had said, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. And now, generations later, that oath was being fulfilled. Joseph, who had saved Egypt from famine, who had brought his family to that land, who had died as the second most powerful man in the empire, his bones were going home. His faith in the promise was being vindicated. They set out from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And here the text describes something extraordinary. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. A pillar of cloud during the day, a pillar of fire during the night, visible to all. Millions of people could look up and see exactly where God was. It wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't a symbol, it was a physical presence, visible, constant. By day, the cloud provided shade in the scorching desert. By night, the fire provided light and warmth in the freezing desert, guide and protection, direction and comfort. 24 hours a day. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Never. During 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, but we are getting ahead of the story, that pillar never disappeared. Generations of Israelites grew up looking at that cloud by day and that fire by night. It was the most normal thing in the world to them, and it was the most supernatural thing any other nation had ever witnessed. But the story was not over yet. Pharaoh was not finished. Exodus 14 opens with God giving strange instructions to Moses. Instead of continuing east toward the wilderness, the people were to turn and camp by the sea, before Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. It was a disastrous military position. Mountains on one side, desert on the other, sea in front, no escape route. And God explained why. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. It was a trap, but not for Israel, for Pharaoh. God was drawing the Egyptian army into a situation from which there would be no return. Pharaoh would look at the vulnerable position of the Israelites and see an easy opportunity to recapture them. He wouldn't resist. And in Egypt, exactly that happened. Someone informed Pharaoh that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, "Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" The pain of the night of the 10th plague was already turning into economic regret. The firstborn were dead, but the economy was also dead. Who would build now? Who would work in the fields devastated by the plagues? Who would make the bricks, carry the stones, serve in the houses? 3 million workers had just walked out the door. Egypt was destroyed and without the labor to rebuild itself. Pharaoh prepared his chariot. He took 600 choice chariots, the elite of the Egyptian army, and all the other chariots of Egypt. Captains over every one of them, cavalry, infantry, archers. The most powerful army in the ancient world was on the move, pursuing unarmed slaves without military training, cornered against the sea. In Pharaoh's mind, it would be a simple operation: surround them, subjugate them, bring them back, perhaps kill a few as an example, restore the natural order of things, Egyptians on top, Hebrews on the bottom. The Egyptians reached them camped by the sea, near Pi-Hahiroth. And when the Israelites lifted their eyes and saw the Egyptian army marching against them, the panic was immediate. They were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. The fear was understandable. Days ago, they were slaves making bricks. Now, they were in the middle of nowhere, without training, without experience, seeing the army that had dominated the known world coming their way. And then they did what they would do repeatedly for the next 40 years. They blamed Moses. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us, to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, "Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians"? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. It was the first of many moments of murmuring, the first of many times the people would look back and romanticize slavery. In Egypt, at least we knew what to expect. In Egypt, at least we were alive. In Egypt, at least we had food. Human memory is selective. The whip, the drowned babies, the years of forced labor, all of this was momentarily forgotten in the face of immediate fear. Moses answered with one of the most memorable sentences in the Bible: "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Stand still. The Lord will fight for you. You don't need to do anything. Just watch. What happens next does not depend on you. It depends on the God who turned water into blood, who covered Egypt in darkness, who killed every firstborn in a single night. That God will fight for you, and you will be silent and observe." But then God said something surprising to Moses. "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. Go forward." Where? There was a sea in front of them. It didn't matter. The order was to march, and then came the instruction that would change history. "But lift up your rod, and stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea." Divide it. One word, one command. As if dividing a sea were the most natural thing in the world. As if the laws of physics were merely suggestions that could be ignored when necessary. Moses had turned water into blood. He had summoned plagues that devastated a civilization. But dividing a sea, this was different. This was altering the very structure of reality on a scale that no human had ever witnessed. The angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved, positioning itself between the Egyptian camp and the Israeli camp. And the text describes something extraordinary. It was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other. The same pillar. Two opposite effects. For the Egyptians, impenetrable darkness. They couldn't see an inch in front of them. For the Israelites, light as clear as day. It was as if reality itself had split, one side in darkness, the other in light. And throughout that night, the two camps remained separate. The Egyptians could not advance. The Israelites had time to prepare. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. The sea divided, and the waters formed a wall on their right hand and on their left. Try to imagine that. A wind so strong it divides a body of water. The waves not just receding, but rising vertically, forming liquid walls on both sides. The sea floor, mud, sand, rocks, shells, sea creatures, suddenly exposed to the open air. And between those two walls of water, a dry path. Not damp, not muddy, dry. The text is specific, on dry ground. The same wind that divided the waters also dried the seafloor. Millions of people would need to pass through there, wagons loaded with goods, flocks of sheep and oxen, elderly and children. A muddy path would be impassable. But God had thought of every detail. The Israelites entered into the midst of the sea. Imagine being the first. Imagine taking that first step into territory that seconds before was submerged. Looking to the right and seeing a wall of water, fish swimming, seaweed floating, marine life continuing as if nothing had happened, except now it was vertical instead of horizontal. Looking to the left and seeing the same thing, and ahead, an impossible corridor stretching to the other side. How long did it take for 2 to 3 million people to cross? The text doesn't say. But if we consider the logistics, women with babies, elderly leaning on canes, children running between adults' legs, wagons pulled by oxen, herds being driven, it must have been hours, all night perhaps. And throughout that time, the walls of water held firm. There were no leaks, no partial collapses. Millions of people walked between two liquid walls that defied every natural law, and not a drop fell on them. When the last Israeli person stepped onto the opposite shore, the Egyptians could finally see. The pillar of cloud dissipated or moved, and Pharaoh saw something that must have looked like a miracle or a trap, a dry path across the sea. The slaves on the other side, a golden opportunity to recapture them. He didn't hesitate. The Egyptian chariots advanced. 600 elite chariots, plus all the other chariots of Egypt, horses trained for war, veteran soldiers of dozens of campaigns, the most sophisticated military machine of the ancient world, entering the corridor between the waters. But something began to go wrong. The text says that, in the morning watch, the last hours before dawn, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian camp through the pillar of fire and cloud and troubled the Egyptian camp. The Hebrew word suggests confusion, panic, chaos, and then a technical detail that must have caused absolute terror. And he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. The chariot wheels locked. In the middle of the sea, with walls of water on both sides, Egypt's most advanced military technology simply stopped working. Chariots jammed, horses balking, formations disintegrating, the ordered army turning into a chaotic mass of men, animals, and useless equipment. The Egyptians cried out, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." They finally understood, but it was too late. God said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand, and at dawn the sea returned to its full depth, not gradually, not little by little. The two walls of water that had stood firm for hours simply collapsed, millions of tons of water crashing down on the Egyptian army, horses and riders, chariots and captains, elite soldiers and recruits, all swallowed by the same sea they had tried to cross. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained, not one. The text is absolute. There were no survivors, no wounded, no prisoners. The entire army, every soldier, every horse, every chariot, was destroyed in minutes. It was the end of the pursuit. It was the end of the Egyptian threat. Israel would never be a slave to that nation again. Pharaoh, whether he was with his army or had stayed on the shore, lost everything. His firstborn son, dead in the 10th plague. His army, drowned in the sea. His kingdom devastated by 10 plagues. His economy destroyed by the loss of millions of slave workers. The Egypt that had been the undisputed superpower of the ancient world was on its knees. It would need decades, perhaps centuries, to recover. And the message had been sent to all nations. The God of Israel was not a minor tribal God. He was the God who controlled the forces of nature, who could humiliate empires, who could divide seas. On the opposite shore, the Israelites looked back, the morning sun illuminating the waters they had just crossed on foot, and in the waves, bodies, dead horses, pieces of chariots, armor, weapons, the remains of the army that hours before had come to enslave them again. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. They saw. They didn't hear about it. They didn't receive news. They saw with their own eyes. Tangible, undeniable, physical evidence that the threat was over. The bodies of their former oppressors being deposited by the waves onto the sand. And what was the response? Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Finally, after all the plagues, after all the signs, after all the proofs, now, seeing the corpses of their enemies on the beach, they truly believed. The fear of the Egyptian army was replaced by the fear of the God who had destroyed that army. Exodus 15 is a chapter unlike anything that came before. It is not narrative, it is poetry, it is music. It is the emotional explosion of a people who have just witnessed the impossible. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord, the Song of the Sea, one of the oldest poetic compositions in the Bible. Some scholars argue it may be the oldest text in the entire biblical corpus, preserved orally for centuries before being written down. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. The structure is hypnotic, repetition and variation, vivid images. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. And then the poetic description of the Egyptian destruction. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom like a stone, like a stone. The image is brutal in its simplicity. Soldiers in heavy armor sinking without a chance to swim, disappearing into the dark depths. The sudden silence after the scream. The song continues celebrating the incomparable power of the God of Israel. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? The question is rhetorical, but in the context of the ancient world, it was revolutionary. Every nation had its gods. Egyptians had hundreds. And the implicit question was, where were those gods when the God of Israel devastated their land? Where was Happy when the Nile turned to blood? Where was Khepri when the insects covered Egypt? Where was Ra when the darkness lasted 3 days? The answer was floating in the waters of the sea. The gods of Egypt had not answered because they could not answer. They were wood, stone, human imagination. The only real God had just demonstrated his uniqueness in an undeniable way. The song then looks to the future. The people will hear and be afraid. Sorrow will take hold of the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom will be dismayed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, will take hold of them. All the inhabitants of Canaan will melt away. The news would spread. Merchants, travelers, refugees, all would carry the story of the sea that opened and the army that drowned. And the peoples in Israel's path, Philistines, Edomites, Moabites, Canaanites, would hear and fear. The Exodus was not just liberation, it was divine propaganda, a demonstration of power that would prepare the way for all that would come after. Then something special happened. Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, the same Miriam who decades earlier had watched a basket floating in the Nile, took a timbrel in her hand. And all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. The same refrain, but now in the voices of the women, with instruments, with dance, with movement. It was bodily, visceral, irrepressible celebration. Generations of pain being released in music and movement. Grandmothers who had seen their grandsons drowned in the Nile now saw the Egyptian soldiers drowned in the sea. The poetic justice was impossible to ignore, but the celebration could not last forever. There was a wilderness ahead, and almost immediately reality set in. Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water, 3 days in the wilderness, without water, with 2 to 3 million people, with millions of animals. The math was brutal. A human being needs at least 2 liters of water a day to survive in normal conditions. In the desert, that number doubles or triples. 3 million people would need at least 6 million liters a day. In 3 days, 18 million liters. And that's not counting the animals. When they finally found water in a place called Marah, it was bitter, undrinkable. The name of the place meant literally bitterness. Imagine the scene: days of thirst, cracked lips, swollen tongues, children crying from thirst, and then, on the horizon, an oasis, a rush to the spring, cupped hands bringing water to the mouth, and then the taste, bitter, impossible to swallow, spitting, despairing. The people complained against Moses. What shall we drink? It was the second murmuring. The first had been at the Red Sea. They had just seen the sea open, the Egyptian army destroyed. Impossible salvation materialized. And 3 days later, they had already forgotten. They were already complaining. But Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. Moses cast the tree into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. Another impossible transformation. Bitter water becoming drinkable by the simple act of throwing a piece of wood into it. There the Lord made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. It was an offer and a warning. Obedience would bring health and protection. The plagues that had devastated Egypt would never touch Israel if Israel remained faithful. The liberation from Egypt was just the beginning. Now the hard part began. Learning to live as God's people. They set out from Marah and came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. Specific numbers. 12 wells, one for each tribe of Israel. 70 palm trees, abundant shade in the scorching desert. After the bitterness of Marah, the abundance of Elim. After the test, the rest. It was a pattern that would repeat many times, but Elim was just a stop. The journey continued. Exodus 16 opens with the people departing from Elim and entering the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Sinai, and again the murmuring. Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Pots of meat, bread to the full, selective memory working again. In Egypt, they were slaves. They ate what they were given when they were given it. But now, hungry in the desert, the past seemed like a banquet. God answered in a way that would define the next 40 years of Israel's history. Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. Bread from heaven, not metaphorically, literally. Food falling from the sky every day, for 40 years, for millions of people. The next morning, when the dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. The Israelites looked and asked one another, "Man who? What is it?" They didn't know what it was, and from that question came the name manna. Moses explained, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." The instructions were specific. Each person was to gather an omer, about 2 liters, per day. No more, no less. And they were not to keep it until the next morning. Some did not obey. They kept manna until the next morning, and the manna bred worms and stank. It rotted overnight. The message was clear: trust God daily. Do not try to accumulate. Do not try to guarantee your own security independently. Every morning, go out and collect. Every morning, trust that there will be provision. But there was an exception. On the sixth day, when they went out to gather, they found double, 2 omers per person. The leaders of the congregation came to Moses, confused. Why double? The answer introduced a concept that would shape Israel's identity forever. This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. The Sabbath, the Shabbat, the seventh day, God was teaching his people to rest, and on the Sabbath the manna did not fall. Those who went out to gather on the seventh day came back empty-handed. God asked Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws?" Think of the pedagogy involved. God didn't simply hand over a rule book. He taught through daily experience. Every morning the Israelites woke up and saw divine provision on the ground. Every Friday they saw double. Every Saturday they saw that the stored manna did not rot, unlike every other day. The lesson was inscribed into the rhythm of life, not just in words. The text describes the manna with sensory details. And it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Imagine eating the same thing every day for 40 years, the same texture, the same honey taste, millions of people, thousands of mornings, billions of meals, all of manna. And there was more. Along the bread from heaven, God sent meat. At evening you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Every evening quails covered the camp. Migratory birds, exhausted from their long travels, landing in impossible numbers, easy to capture. Fresh protein to complement the manna. God commanded Moses to keep an omer of manna in a jar for future generations, that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. A time capsule, physical evidence of the daily miracle. For 40 years, the children of Israel ate manna until they came to the land of Canaan. Exodus 17 brings another test. The whole congregation departed from the wilderness of Sin and camped in Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink, and once again, the murmuring. But this time, more intense. The people contended with Moses. They didn't just complain, they contended. The Hebrew word suggests legal conflict, a formal dispute. "Give us water that we may drink." Moses replied, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?" But the people were thirsty, and thirst does not accept theological arguments. Thirst is visceral, desperate. 2 to 3 million people and millions of animals without water in the desert. The situation was explosive. The people murmured against Moses, "Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me, stone me." Moses felt he was losing control, that the crowd was turning into a mob, that his life was in danger. The same people he had liberated now threatened to kill him. God instructed Moses to take some of the elders of Israel, take the staff that had struck the Nile, and go to a specific rock in Horeb. "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." Moses obeyed. He struck the rock with the staff before the eyes of the elders, and water gushed out, not a trickle, a gush sufficient for millions of people and animals, from a rock in the desert. The place was named Massah and Meribah, temptation and contention, because of the murmuring of the people and because they tempted the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" That question revealed everything. After all the plagues, after the sea opened, after the manna fell daily, after the quails arrived every evening, they still asked, "Is God with us?" Then came war. Exodus 17:8 is abrupt, almost shocking in its simplicity. Now Amalek came and fought Israel in Rephidim. Amalek, descendants of Esau, according to biblical genealogies. Desert nomads who saw the Israeli crowd as easy prey, or perhaps as a threat to the scarce resources of the region, or perhaps simply as an opportunity for plunder. The Israelites were not warriors. They were newly freed slaves, brickmakers, not soldiers. They had no military training, no combat experience, no weapons beyond what they had managed to grab in haste when leaving Egypt. Moses said to Joshua, the first mention of this name that would dominate the next book of the Bible, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Joshua obeyed. He chose men. He marched to battle. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill, and something extraordinary happened. When Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. When he let down his hands, Amalek prevailed. The connection between Moses' posture and the outcome of the battle was direct, visible, undeniable. Hands raised, victory. Hands lowered, defeat. It was almost as if there were a switch connecting hill to the battlefield. But Moses was human. His hands grew heavy, his arms grew tired. He couldn't keep them raised indefinitely. The solution was collective. Aaron and Hur took a stone and put it under Moses, and he sat on it. Then each supported Moses' hands, one on each side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. The image is powerful. The leader supported by his companions. Victory depending not just on one man, but on a team. Aaron on one side, Hur on the other, Moses in the middle. 3 men working together to keep the hands raised. Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. After the battle, God commanded something unusual. Write this for a memorial in a book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Write this for a memorial in a book. It is the first explicit mention of writing in the Exodus narrative. Moses was to record the event, create a permanent document, start a record that would grow to become the Torah, the 5 books, the foundation of the entire biblical tradition. And the promise about Amalek was absolute. God would have war with Amalek from generation to generation. The hostility against Israel in the desert would not be forgotten. Exodus 18 brings an unexpected visit. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, the priest of Midian, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel. The news had traveled. Merchants, nomads, messengers, all carried the story of the sea that opened, the army that drowned, the plagues that devastated Egypt. Jethro brought with him Zipporah, Moses' wife, and his 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. Apparently, Moses had sent them back at some unspecified point in the text. Now the family was reunited. The meeting was warm. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. They asked each other how they were and went into the tent. There, Moses told everything. The plagues, the exodus, the sea, the difficulties of the way, the deliverances. Jethro's response is significant. "Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods." A Midianite priest, recognizing the supremacy of the God of Israel. Was it a conversion? A diplomatic admission? The text does not elaborate. But Jethro offered burnt offerings and sacrifices to God, and Aaron and all the elders of Israel came to eat bread with him in the presence of God, a banquet of reconciliation and celebration. The next day, Jethro observed Moses working, and what he saw worried him. Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before him from morning until evening, an endless line of disputes, questions, conflicts, millions of people with millions of problems, and a single man trying to solve it all. Jethro asked, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" Moses' answer revealed his mindset, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws. Moses saw himself as indispensable, the only channel between God and the people, the only judge, the only interpreter. Jethro was direct. The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Management consulting in the Sinai desert. A father-in-law observing organizational inefficiency and proposing restructuring. Jethro advised Moses to teach the people the statutes and the laws, show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do, but also to delegate. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. A hierarchy, layers of leadership, rulers of thousands supervising rulers of hundreds, who supervised rulers of fifties, who supervised rulers of tens, each small group having an accessible leader, smaller problems being resolved at the lower levels. Only the most difficult questions reaching Moses, and let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. Moses listened, Moses implemented. He chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people. And Jethro, having fulfilled his function, went back to his own land. The clock was ticking. Exodus 19:1 marks the time with precision. In the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. 3rd month, approximately 50 days since Passover, 50 days since the 10th plague, 50 days since the blood of the lamb was smeared on the doors. Later, this period would be formalized as the Feast of Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. The wilderness of Sinai, the mountain of God, the same place where Moses had seen the burning bush decades earlier, where he had heard the voice for the first time, where he had received the mission to liberate Israel. Now he was back, not alone, but with millions of people. Israel camped before the mountain, and Moses went up to God. The intimacy between Moses and God is notable in the text. He simply went up. No elaborate ceremony, no ritual purification mentioned. He went up, and God spoke. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Eagle's wings. The metaphor is poetic and precise. The eagle carries its young on its own wings, protecting them, elevating them, transporting them to places they could not reach alone. This was how God saw the Exodus, him carrying Israel through every danger. And then came the proposal. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Kingdom of priests, holy nation, special treasure. Not just a nation among others, not just an ethnic group trying to survive, but a people with a special purpose. Mediators between God and humanity. Holy, set apart, distinct, different. Moses went down and called the elders. He laid before them all the words that the Lord commanded him. And the people answered together, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. They accepted the terms without knowing exactly what they were accepting. They agreed to the covenant before knowing its detailed clauses. It was an act of faith, or perhaps gratitude. After all God had done, how could they say no? Moses brought the people's response back to God. And God announced something unprecedented. Behold, I come to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. God would speak, not through intermediaries, not through signs, directly. The people would hear the divine voice with their own ears, and they would never again doubt Moses' authority. But preparation was necessary. God instructed Moses to sanctify the people. Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. 3 days of preparation, ritual purification, washing of clothes, an external symbol of inner cleansing and limits. Moses was to set bounds around the mountain. No one could touch the mountain under penalty of death, neither man nor beast. Whoever touched it would be stoned or shot with an arrow. No hand should touch him. The holiness of God required separation. The divine presence was dangerous for unprepared humans. The third day arrived, and at dawn there were thunders and lightnings, a thick cloud on the mountain, the sound of a trumpet so loud that all the people in the camp trembled. It wasn't a metaphor. Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly, millions of people witnessing natural or supernatural phenomena of an apocalyptic scale. Deafening thunders, lightnings cutting the sky, dense smoke covering the peak, the earth trembling under their feet. And over all this, a trumpet sound that grew louder and louder. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They stood at the foot of the mountain, millions of people in terrified silence looking up at the smoke, at the fire, at the lightnings that tore the darkness of the cloud. And the trumpet sound continued to increase. It didn't decrease. It didn't stabilize. It grew, each second louder than the last. Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. An audible conversation between a man and the creator of the universe, witnessed by an entire nation. Then God called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. God warned him once more, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish." Even the priests who came near the Lord were to sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. The language is violent. Break out, as if God's holiness were a contained force about to explode against any contamination. Moses went down, warned the people. And then, Exodus chapter 20, 10 verses that changed human history. And God spoke all these words, saying, what followed were the 10 commandments. Not 10 suggestions, not 10 pieces of advice, commandments. Absolute imperatives coming from the mouth of God himself, heard by the ears of millions. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. The introduction established credentials. Who was speaking? The God who had just performed the greatest rescue in history, the God of the plagues, the God of the open sea, the God of the daily manna. This God was now setting the rules of the relationship. You shall have no other gods before me. The first commandment, total exclusivity. In a world where every city had its gods, every natural phenomenon its divinity, every nation its pantheon, Israel was to worship only one. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. The second commandment forbade visual representations of God. No statue, no idol, no attempt to capture the divine in material form. This separated Israel from absolutely every other religion in the ancient world. Egyptians had their golden statues. Canaanites had their sacred poles. Mesopotamians had their ziggurats full of images. Israel would have nothing visible. A God without a face. A God who could not be carved or painted. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The third commandment protected the sanctity of the divine name. It was not to be used lightly, falsely, or in oaths that would not be kept. The name carried power. Using it poorly was profanation. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The fourth commandment. What they had already learned through the manna now became formal law. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And the justification? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. The human rhythm should mirror the divine rhythm of creation. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The 5th commandment was the first with a promise attached. Honoring parents was not just a matter of respect. It was linked to longevity in the promised land. The family structure was the foundation of the social structure. And then, in quick succession, the commandments that regulated the relationship between people. You shall not murder. In English, 4 words. In Hebrew, 2, lo tirtzak. Human life was sacred. Taking a life was to usurp divine prerogative. You shall not commit adultery. Marriage was inviolable. The covenant between husband and wife reflected the covenant between God and Israel. You shall not steal. Property had divine protection. What belonged to one's neighbor was not to be taken. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Truth was mandatory, especially in legal contexts. Lying about someone was to destroy their reputation, perhaps their life. You shall not covet. The 10th commandment was different. It didn't regulate actions, but desires, not to covet a neighbor's house, nor his wife, nor his servant, nor his animal, nor anything that belonged to the neighbor. God was not satisfied with correct external behavior. He wanted purified hearts, disciplined minds, ordered desires, 10 commandments, 4 regulating the vertical relationship between humans and God, 6 regulating the horizontal relationship between humans and humans, engraved in stone, but intended to be engraved in hearts. As God spoke, the people saw the thunders and the lightnings, the trumpet sound and the smoking mountain. Seeing thunders, the Hebrew expression suggests synesthesia, senses mixing, the experience so intense it transcended normal categories of perception, and the people feared. They trembled, they moved back, they stood afar off. They said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die." They couldn't take any more. God's voice was too much. The presence was overwhelming. They preferred a human intermediary to continuing to hear directly from the Creator. Moses answered, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin." The Sinai experience was pedagogical. God wanted them to know who they were dealing with. That reverent fear might prevent future sins, that they might never forget the day they heard the voice from heaven. The people stood afar off. Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. The image is paradoxical, darkness and fire at the same time, smoke and lightnings, darkness that shone. Moses entered into all of it, alone. And there, in the luminous darkness of Sinai, God continued to speak. Chapters 21, 22, and 23 of Exodus contain what scholars call the Covenant Code, dozens of specific laws expanding and applying the 10 Commandments. Laws about slaves and freedom, laws about violence and restitution, laws about property and responsibility, laws about justice and mercy. Some of these laws seem strange to modern ears. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years. And in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. Slavery regulated, not abolished, but with limits, with an expiration date, with protections that didn't exist in any other ancient society. If a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. The slave had a right to life. The master did not have absolute power. The law protected the vulnerable against the powerful. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot. The famous lex talionis, often misunderstood as barbaric. In fact, it was a limitation. The punishment could not exceed the crime. If someone broke your arm, you couldn't kill them in retaliation. Proportionality was mandatory. In a world of disproportionate vendettas, of families exterminated for individual offenses, this law was revolutionary in its moderation. Other laws revealed God's heart for the marginalized. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The memory of oppression should generate compassion for the oppressed. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. Harsh language, a direct threat. God placed himself as the personal protector of the most vulnerable. Widows and orphans had direct access to him. Their cries were heard, their tears were counted, and there were laws about loans. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. Lending to the poor was an act of mercy, not an opportunity for profit. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? The poor man's cloak was his blanket at night. Taking it as security for a debt and not returning it before nightfall was to condemn him to the cold. The law forbade this. Because, and here is the theological reason, it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. God is gracious, therefore his people should be gracious. Ethics flowed from theology. Human behavior should mirror the divine character. Exodus 24 brings the ceremony of the ratification of the covenant. Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. Early in the morning, he built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars, one for each tribe of Israel. He sent young men of the children of Israel, who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins. The other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. He didn't whisper, he didn't summarize. He read every word, every law, every commandment. And the people answered, all that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. Moses took the blood from the basins and sprinkled it on the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you according to all these words. Blood on the altar, representing God. Blood on the people, representing Israel. The same blood linking both parties. A pact sealed in red. A covenant ratified with life. Then something extraordinary happened. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up the mountain. And they saw the God of Israel. The text is careful here. And they saw the God of Israel. It doesn't describe a face. It doesn't detail a form. It only says that under his feet there was, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. They saw and lived. They ate and drank in the presence of God. A banquet on the holy mountain. Elders of Israel dining with the Creator of the universe. The intimacy is shocking. The audacity is unimaginable. And yet God did not lay his hand on the nobles of the children of Israel. He spared them. He allowed the encounter. He shared the meal. After the banquet, God called Moses to go up even higher. Come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. Tablets of stone, not papyrus, not parchment, stone, permanence, durability, something that would last millennia. Moses arose with Joshua his assistant and went up to the mountain of God. To the elders he said, wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man has a difficulty, let him go to them. Moses went up into the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, God called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. The sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. They looked from below. They saw the top in flames. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days, 40 nights, without food, without water. Is this humanly impossible? Perhaps. The text does not explain how Moses survived. It only states that he remained. And during those 40 days, God revealed something that would occupy the next 7 chapters of Exodus. Detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle. What is the tabernacle? A tent, but not just any tent. The tent where God would dwell in the midst of his people, and let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. God wanted to live with Israel, not just visit them occasionally, not just speak from the top of a mountain, to dwell in the midst daily. The instructions were extraordinarily specific. Materials: gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple and scarlet thread, fine linen, goat's hair, ram skins dyed red, badger skins, acacia wood, oil, spices, onyx stones. Furniture: an ark of acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, with 2 cherubim of gold at the ends. A table for the bread of the presence. A lampstand of pure gold with 7 branches. An altar of incense, an altar of burnt offerings, a bronze basin, and the dimensions were exact. The ark was to be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. The tabernacle was to have 10 curtains of fine woven linen, each 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Specific numbers, precise measurements, determined colors, irreplaceable materials. Why so much specificity? Because the tabernacle was not a human invention. It was a copy of a celestial model. And see to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. Moses saw something on the mountain, a pattern, an archetype, and he was to reproduce it on earth. While Moses was receiving these glorious revelations at the top of the mountain, something very different was happening in the valley. The people saw that Moses delayed coming down. 40 days was a long time, weeks without news, without a sign of life. The leader had disappeared into the cloud of fire and had not returned. Anxiety grew, impatience fermented, fear turned into action. The people gathered together to Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Note the language. This Moses, detachment, subtle contempt. The man who brought us up, not God, but Moses. As if the Exodus had been a human work, as if Moses had done everything alone. And memory was short. Weeks before they had seen the sea open, days before they had heard the voice of God. And now they were asking for man-made gods. Aaron, the same Aaron who had seen all the plagues, who had spoken to Pharaoh, who had gone up the mountain and eaten in the presence of God, Aaron yielded. Without recorded resistance, without theological argument, only practical instructions. Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. The people obeyed. They brought the gold. Aaron took the gold, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made a molded calf. The people looked and said, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." Why a calf? Egypt worshipped Apis, the sacred bull. Fertility cults throughout the region used bovine images. The calf was familiar, visible, tangible. Everything the invisible God of Sinai was not. Aaron built an altar before the calf, and he proclaimed, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." He still used the name of God, Yah, the Lord, as if he could syncretize, as if he could worship the true God through a false image. As if the form didn't matter, only the intention. The next day, the people rose early. They offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. They sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. The Hebrew word for play suggests more than innocent fun, dances, licentiousness, orgies perhaps. The worship of the calf had become a pagan feast. At the top of the mountain, God interrupted the instructions for the tabernacle. Go, get down. For your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Your people. God was disassociating himself, distancing himself. Israel was now Moses' people, not God's. They have turned aside quickly out of the way, which I commanded them. 40 days. Only 40 days since they had promised all that the Lord has spoken we will do. 40 days since the blood of the covenant. 40 days since they saw the glory and trembled with fear, and they had already built an idol. God declared his intention. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And I will make of you a great nation, total destruction, complete extermination, a restart from Moses, a new nation without the baggage of a rebellious people. Was it an offer, test, a real threat? Scholars debate, but Moses did not hesitate. He interceded. Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Moses returned the language. Not my people, your people. God had brought Israel out of Egypt. God had invested centuries of preparation. God had sent the plagues, opened the sea, given the manna. Israel was a divine project, not a human one. And then Moses presented an argument that seems almost audacious. Why should the Egyptians speak and say, he brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? God's reputation among the nations. If he destroyed Israel now, Egypt would laugh. They would say the Hebrew God had liberated his people only to massacre them in the desert. Moses continued, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. Promises, oaths, covenants made with the patriarchs centuries before. Moses was reminding God of his own words, not because God had forgotten, but because that is how intercession works. The intercessor presents arguments, appeals to the divine nature, invokes previous commitments, and the text says something extraordinary. So the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. Relented. The Hebrew word is nacham. It means to change direction, to feel regret, to reconsider. God changed course because of the intercession of one man, a man who stood between divine wrath and a rebellious people. Moses went down from the mountain, in his hands the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written on both sides, written by the finger of God, the Creator's own handwriting on rock. Joshua heard the voice of the people as they shouted and said, there is a noise of war in the camp. He interpreted the noise as a battle, but Moses knew his people better. It is not the noise of the shout of victory, nor the noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. And as they drew near the camp, Moses saw the golden calf shining under the desert sun, the dances around it, the party in full swing. And Moses' anger grew hot. He cast the tablets from his hands. He broke them at the foot of the mountain. The 10 commandments in fragments. The covenant shattered like the stone that carried it. But Moses did not stop at the tablets. He took the calf they had made. He burned it in the fire. He ground it until it became fine powder. He scattered it on the water, and he made the children of Israel drink it. The God they had worshipped went down their throats. It entered their stomachs. If the calf was divine, let it save them from within. If it was only melted gold, and it was, let them feel the bitter taste of their idolatry. To Aaron, Moses asked, what did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? Aaron's answer is almost comical in its weakness. Do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. He blamed the people. He said they asked for gods, that he only collected the gold, and here is the blatant lie. I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. Came out, as if the calf had formed itself, as if Aaron hadn't used an engraving tool, as if the sculpture had emerged spontaneously from the flames. The excuse of a child caught red-handed. Moses saw that the people were unrestrained. Discipline had evaporated. Order had collapsed. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and cried, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me." All the sons of Levi gathered themselves to him. The priestly tribe, Moses and Aaron's family, they chose a side. And Moses gave them a terrible order. Every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. The Levites obeyed. That day about 3,000 men of the people fell, 3,000 dead by the swords of their brothers. Idolatry had a price, rebellion had consequences, the broken covenant required blood. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, so now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Atonement, covering, expiation. Moses would return to the mountain to try to repair the irreparable. And his prayer there was one of the most extraordinary in the Bible. "Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written." Moses offered his own life, his own eternity. If God would not forgive Israel, let him erase Moses too. Absolute solidarity, shared destiny, a leader truly willing to die for his people. God answered, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book." Substitution didn't work like that. Each would carry their own guilt, but even so, God would spare the nation. He would not destroy them completely. The journey would continue. Now therefore, go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. The mission remained. Canaan was still the destination. But something had changed. God said, "Behold, my angel shall go before you," no longer the direct presence. An angel, an intermediary, distance where there had once been intimacy. Moses did not accept this. In Exodus 33 he pressed, "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here." Without God, it wasn't worth going. Canaan without the divine presence was just another piece of land. What set Israel apart from other nations wasn't territory. It was having the Creator dwelling among them, and God yielded. "I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name." Grace, unmerited favor, intimate knowledge. Moses had something with God that no one else had. Then Moses made the boldest request in all the Bible. "Please show me your glory." He wanted to see God, not the cloud, not the fire, not the thunders, the divine essence itself, the full glory. God answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, but there was a limit. You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live." God's face was lethal to mortals, too much glory, too much concentrated holiness. No flesh would survive the direct encounter, but God offered an alternative. "Here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Moses would see God's back, the trace of glory, the resonance of the presence after it passed, not the face, but enough to transform him forever. God told Moses to prepare 2 new tablets of stone. The first had been broken. New ones needed to be carved. And Moses went up to Sinai again, another 40 days, another 40 nights. When he came down, something had happened to his face. The skin of his face shone. It glowed. It emitted light, the reflection of the glory he had glimpsed. The people were afraid to come near him. Moses had to call them, calm them, cover his face with a veil when he was not transmitting God's words. The final chapters of Exodus, 35 to 40, describe the construction of the tabernacle. The people brought voluntary offerings, so much gold, silver, bronze, and fabrics that Moses had to tell them to stop. There was too much material, overflowing generosity where there had once been idolatry. Skilled artisans worked. Bezalel and Aholiab, filled with the Spirit of God, built each piece according to the model shown on the mountain. The ark, the mercy seat, the cherubim, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the curtains, the pillars. On the first day of the first month of the second year, the tabernacle was set up, exactly 1 year after the departure from Egypt. And when everything was ready, the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The same glory of Sinai, the same consuming fire. But now, not on a distant mountain, in the middle of the camp, God had come to live with his people. When the cloud was taken up, Israel marched. When the cloud rested, Israel camped. By day, a cloud, by night, fire, visible to all the tribes, a constant guide through the wilderness. And so the book of Exodus ends, not with the arrival in Canaan, that would take another 40 years, not with final victory, many battles were yet to come, but with presence. God dwelling in the midst of an imperfect, rebellious, often unfaithful people. Looking back, what does Exodus teach us? That liberation is possible, that no oppression lasts forever, that slaves can become a nation, that the sea opens when there seems to be no path, but also that freedom is only the beginning, that free people still need direction, that without law there is chaos, that without a divine presence the journey loses its meaning. The Israelites left Egypt in one night, but it took generations for Egypt to leave them. 40 years in the wilderness would be necessary. An entire generation would die before their children set foot in the promised land. And yet God remained, despite the golden calf, despite the constant complaints, despite the chronic ingratitude. The cloud continued to guide, the manna continued to fall, the presence continued to dwell. That is Exodus, a story of a God who hears the cries of slaves, who comes down to deliver, who makes the impossible seem routine, who gives law to create order, who builds a tabernacle to create intimacy, who persists even when his people give up. And if you have watched this far, you have just walked through one of the most important books ever written, a story that shaped 3 world religions, that inspired liberation movements on every continent, that continues to speak thousands of years later about slavery and freedom, about law and grace, about a God who chooses to dwell in the midst of imperfect people. If you made it this far, click on the next video appearing on your screen. I've set it aside especially for those who watched this one until the end.